Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Catherine, and I think we're in for a pretty quick episode because we are going to China, but we also raced like 5 minutes ago, so there's really not that much to talk about. That said, I have lots of things to say, and I have lots of opinions about motorsport to inflict upon the greater population. So please make sure that you like and subscribe so that you can continue to get my opinions inflicted upon you. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review so that I can, like I said, continue inflicting my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. Now, there's basically no news. Lewis Hamilton went horseback riding, and that's kind of been like the biggest thing that the drivers have been up to this week, ahead of the race weekend. Lando Norris, unsurprisingly, has made a pretty abrupt U-turn after saying, preseason that Max should retire, quit the sport if he's so unhappy with the current regulation and the new generation of cars. But apparently now that they've actually had cars on track, and now that McLaren has actually raced a race and we've seen where their pace, stacks up with the rest of the grid, it's very interesting that he's making an about face and admits that there are actual problems. And I just think that's really interesting timing about this, abrupt U-turn that he has done. But anyway, we are scraping the bottom of the barrel for Formula One news. I had an ad fed to me today that the Circuit of the Americas has announced their super stage headliners for the COTA race weekend in October. Maroon 5 is going to be performing on October 23rd, that Friday, and Post Malone is going to be performing on October 24th, the Saturday before the race. And that's a very interesting lineup. I didn't really know that Maroon 5 was still performing. Oops. But yeah, that's if you're looking forward to COTA in March, April, May, June, July, 7 months, those are going to be the performers that you're going to be seeing on the super stage. Now, looking back to last year in China was also the second race weekend of the season. So we were kind of in the same place of not really knowing what was in store for us, and the nonsense and the trauma and the papaya rules and the misery that it caused. But anyway, I didn't really actually remember, because so many things happened in the 2025 season. I didn't really remember what happened. So I had to look at our old rundown to see what we talked about in last year's episode. But the sprint podium, because it was also a sprint race, was Lewis, Oscar, Max. The China sprint was actually not terrible as a race, but then the Grand Prix itself was, let's call it, pretty boring, and that the real carnage didn't come until afterwards. But first, to refresh your memory on the podium, it was an Oscar win, a Lando P2, and a George P3, because Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly were both disqualified for being underweight, and Lewis Hamilton was disqualified for excessive skid plank wear, giving Ferrari a double DNF and a double dose of misery, and also a double dose of foreshadowing to that hilarious McLaren double DNF for skid plank wear that we had later last season. And that was also the following day when Red Bull announced that Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson were going to be doing the old switcheroo and trading seats and trading teams. So there was a lot of things happening around that race, but it was really about what was happening like off the track or right before racing and right after racing, which, typical of a sprint weekend. Now, this weekend, I think that the dominant force and the dominant nonsense this weekend is going to be the question of battery capacity. And will these car batteries be able to make Vroom car go fast for the entirety of a single lap? Because we saw the Australia qualifying, Georgia's pole time was 3 full seconds slower than the 2025 pole time. And we are probably also going to see that same significant discrepancy in this Chinese Grand Prix, because this is a longer track, which we have said many a time in our maligning of sprint races that sprint races should be on shorter tracks. Well, Shanghai is probably one of the longer tracks on the grid. It is 5.451 kilometers, which averages out to about 3.387 miles, which is slightly longer than the Australia track. And if we have cars that could not maintain their full battery on a single flying lap in Australia, then I think we're going to have those same issues. I know we're going to have those same issues once we get to Shanghai. It's a longer track, so we are definitely not going to see the same times that we saw last season even close. And, the The thing that they're kind of touting is the big deal with these cars is that you recharge the battery when you're braking. When do you brake? You brake when you turn. And China, for all that, it has some issues, China does have a lot of great turns, which will give the drivers opportunities to charge the batteries more than they have at, say, an Australia type track, just with, by virtue of the different braking that we're going to see. But at the same time, China has an absurdly long straight, which a lot of tracks do, but this, the Chinese one is pretty significant in its drag. I would say that, Qatar has one, if we're going to get to Qatar at all this season. Miami has the back straight that I do not like because the Miami track sucks. There's another one that I'm thinking about that is not coming to the top of my head. But if you can't go flat out on one of these long straights, that's going to make a significant problem for the racing that we're going to be seeing this weekend. So that's something to, I would say, be concerned about as we watch this weekend. And of course, the bigger concern is with these sprint weekends and with the experiences that we have had with the current sprint format, where you have one free practice, which also one free practice is not a lot of free practice time, as we fully well know. But we have one free practice, then we go into sprint qualifying, then the sprint race, then regular qualifying, and then the Grand Prix. Now, I still maintain that the earlier sprint format of the sprint sets the grid for the following race, so you do have 2 practice sessions, that is better than what we have now. But Stefano Domenicali doesn't listen to me for whatever reason. I think that's weird. But anyway, we have one free practice, and it is not going to be very long, and we're going to have 2 qualifying sessions that are both not going to be all that great. And then we're going to have a Grand Prix that's probably going to be, a meh Grand Prix. If I rated the Australian Grand Prix a 3.5 out of 5, I'm sure this is probably going to shoot somewhere into like a 2.5. And I am saying this so emphatically because I would love to be proven wrong. But I do think that either we're going to have a typical sprint race type of weekend, or we're going to have 2 really bad races where, in a typical sprint race weekend, if you don't remember because you've blocked it out due to trauma or whatever, sprint, sometimes you'll have either a good sprint race and a mediocre Grand Prix, or you'll have a mediocre sprint race and a good Grand Prix. So I think that that's the best we can hope for. Like, I fully do not expect for us to have 2 very exciting races, a sprint race and a Grand Prix race. I really just don't think we're going to have that, which is, let's call it unfortunate, but it is also just a fact of the sprint race format. But of course, the reason why they're so all in on sprints is because a person is more likely to tune in to a sprint race rather than free practice 2, which is fair. Free practice 2 isn't always the most exciting, but that doesn't mean that the sprint race replacing it is going to be as good, or if the Grand Prix at the end of a sprint race weekend is going to be all of that great. But as I said, what do I know? Anyway, we'll see. I really would like to, from a performance standpoint, obviously we have teams that have a lot of work to do. Williams has a lot to improve. Aston Martin has leaps and bounds and mountains to climb over to improve. I really want to see the continued performance that we saw out of Audi in Australia. I would love to see that again in China. So I think that it's going to be a question of, are teams going to be able to maintain their performances from last week? What kind of drop-offs are we going to see in performance? Obviously, I want to see Max Verstappen actually finish a qualifying to see what the true top pace of the Red Bull is. Isaac Hadjar qualifying P3, that was all great. Hopefully they've dealt with the little gremlins in the engines that, caused Hadjar's engine to go kind of kaboom. But after he got out of the car, it was fine. So I really would like to see what the Red Bull really looks like. I am really hoping that Ferrari has learned not to be too overly dependent on safety cars when they are coming up with their pit stop strategies, because I do think that they could have had a better result if they didn't say, we're going to wait for another safety car, and that just didn't happen and really didn't work out for them. And Lewis was left adrift of the podium. We'll see. Like they did not listen to Carlos when Carlos had the strategy. Just listen to Lewis. They're not going to listen to Lewis. We've already discussed that in the Australia reactions episode, that they just fully don't they don't take driver input the same way other teams do. But if you're a Ferrari fan, you can only hope that one day the Ferrari, team will listen to its Ferrari drivers and bring Ferrari into the present when it comes to performance. I want to see a little bit more out of Cadillac. And I know Cadillac, like any result is a good result for Cadillac. And, they got one car that finished in last week. So I want to just see especially the newer teams, I want to see them improve from this previous week. I know that might be a little bit much to ask for, but hey, I have very high expectations in all things and people just have to live with it. But we'll see. I'm looking forward to this weekend just to see if we can get more information about the deficiencies in the cars and how it's going to ultimately improve as we go through the season. Now, that's all I got, because really it's been 3 days. We raced. I'm sorry, it's been 4 days. We raced 4 days ago. We're going to be racing again. So hopefully they will generate some more news after this weekend. But let's get into my Chinese Grand Prix predictions. Now, I am still going to be predicting pole, podium, P10, and I will still be doing the surprise and the dumb, and I will still be giving myself points because I like that validation for myself and because it is very difficult to predict these things. So I get very excited when I am correct. And if you would like to predict along with me, you can send me your pole, podium, and P10 predictions to me on Instagram at going.off.track. If you want to do it prior to the race weekend, more power to you. If you want to do it after qualifying, you can do it after qualifying as well. I will let you choose. Obviously, this is a sprint weekend, so we have 2 sets of poles, podiums, and P8s to pick. And so for my sprint pole, I am going with Kimi Antonelli because it can't just all be George. I don't want it all to be George. Like, George may be the current front runner, and I'm still not really convinced that he is the actual front runner for the Drivers' Championship. But I would like to see not Mercedes getting into the same pickle that McLaren backed themselves into of we have 2 number 1 drivers, which, let's be real, but I would like to see Kimi Antonelli on pole. So we're going to go with a Kimi Antonelli pole. We're going to go for sprint podium I would like Kimi to have a win. Let's give Kimi the win this week. We're going to give a Kimi Antonelli win. We're going to go a Charles Leclerc P2 and a Lewis Hamilton P3. I think that everybody wants this to be Ferrari's day. So let's make this Ferrari's day. And then for P8, which is the last place that you score points in the sprint race format, I'm going to give that to Nico Hulkenberg. I'm going to go with the Hulk. I think that is a good shooting point for the Audi. And I think that's also kind of generally where the Audi, I think that's like optimistic for Audi, but that's like generally where they're going to be racing this season, is in that like lower tier of the points. So going into the Grand Prix, I'm going to give pole back to George because we haven't really seen the performance of everybody else. I do think that Mercedes might have the tiniest edge, especially when it comes to making the battery last the entirety of the lap, which, like I said, hopefully that is going to be less of an issue here, but I really do think it's going to be more of an issue. But for podium, I think that we're going to get another moment of that great overtaking ability from the Ferrari, and not the like overtake mode overtaking ability, but that like shoot off the line overtaking ability. And I'm going to go with a Charles Leclerc P1. I'm going to give George the P2, and I'm going to give Max P3 because I think that that's where Red Bull is going to be topping out at this point. And I think that obviously Max will be able to outdrive the car, I think, a little bit more than, say, Isaac Hadjar. God love Isaac Hadjar, but I think he's going to need a little bit more time. But so I think that generally this is where we're going to expect to see Max for a little while. Moving on to P10, which is the last points in a Grand Prix, and it is also the hardest points to predict. I'm going to go with Alex Albon. I think, like I said, last race, that this is like optimistic finish point for Williams is going to be that like P9, P10, P11 range. So I'm going to say that is where Alex Albon is going to finish. I'm probably going to be wrong, but it's always fun to try. Now, for funsies, we're still going to do the biggest surprise and who's going to do it dumb. I think that the biggest surprise, typically I would go specifically to a driver or a team, but right now we're going to go with it's actually a good race weekend, which God, the bar is so low right now, which is just incredibly awkward. But we're going with it's going to be a good sprint weekend. And then for who's going to do a dumb, like I said, it's going to be these battery issues. And I think that these battery issues on this longer track and on these longer straights are going to cause bigger problems. And everybody's going to be spending the next, time between races complaining about all of it. So hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm probably right. Now, moving on, speaking of other support races that we're going to have this weekend, F1 Academy, I did a whole episode previewing the 2026 F1 Academy grid yesterday. As of recording, it was yesterday. It was 2 days ago when this gets published. But anyway, and as I said during that episode, as recording on Tuesday, it was very interesting that they actually hadn't unveiled the entire grid and that we were still missing one full-time driver. Well, as I got ready to post this episode, I double checked again, and they had just announced the final driver on the grid, the final full-time driver on the grid. We're not talking wild cards here. Driving for the Prema team is going to be Natalia Granada, who drove in the rookie test in 2025 and has been promoted. She will be driving in the Sephora car, which if you know Sephora branding, which I assume you do, then it is exactly what you expect out of both her race suit and the car's livery. I think that's great. It's another one of those phenomenal opportunities for a, women's-based company, primarily women's-based company. Yes, men wear makeup too, to get into motorsport. And obviously that is something that's significant that we have seen on the F1 Academy side. They had the partnership with Charlotte Tilbury. We don't have the Charlotte Tilbury car anymore, but it was fun while it lasted. So all of these things are really just giving the spotlight even larger on F1 Academy, and it's great for both the teams, it's great for the drivers, it's great for all the organizations that are coming in as sponsors, and I'm really excited to see the cars on the grid this year. Obviously, we're not going to have the same battery issues in F1 Academy, so we will have less complaints on that end, but we'll see. Weather-wise, we are not going to have any sorts of weather, so this is going to be a normal standard dry race, so we will see. Once again, this is going to give us a good opportunity to see where we're really shaking out and what adjustments teams have been able to make since Australia, which yes, Australia was 4 days ago as of recording. So we're really probably not going to see much significant changes. We might see one or two upgrades. I haven't checked if there's, actual listed upgrades that the teams have brought, probably a couple, but it's going to be a very notable race weekend for this early section. Also, obviously, because we still don't know yet the fate of the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which are rounds 4 and 5. We still don't know what is happening there. So teams are going to want to take as much advantage as possible before those cancellations are potentially announced. The writing is on the wall unless things change very, very quickly, which, let's be real, I do not expect. So teams are going to want to get as much information, as much good data, and as many good results as they can through this race weekend and next race weekend. And I think that this is going to, we're really not going to know where the teams truly shake out, who the favorites truly are, who's really good. Obviously, the Mercedes looks really good. Obviously, the Ferrari looks really good. And if they can, not strategize themselves into oblivion, they could actually get somewhere. But this will also be very valuable for all of the other teams that are looking to make some adjustments. So we shall see. It's going to be very interesting. And I don't know how much I'm looking forward to staying up until 2:00 in the morning, because the Chinese Grand Prix is not at a good start time compared to where I live here in Arizona. But what can you do? That's why I take naps. Anyway, up next, we will have our Chinese Grand Prix reaction episode, which will probably be out on Sunday, depending on my life choices. It might be out Sunday. It will definitely be out Monday. So we'll see. But that's what I have for you today. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you all in the next one.